for Wittgenstein, and maybe even we can do a little bit of a bio on who he was and that kind of thing, and then just to help picture an understanding of this guy and make it concrete. But what's at stake is the practice of philosophy and metaphysics. He was someone who really thought you couldn't do metaphysics, that you had to remain silent of it. He knew it was important. He felt like religion and ethics and metaphysics was an important thing, but it was also something that we couldn't speak about. So he held this kind of paradoxical relationship to, the essences of what's important in life.
Scholars of Wittgenstein treat the Tractatus as a mystical book.
Yeah. Yes. And it's exactly because the second half was the most important, and the second half was the half that he didn't write. So you have this prelude to something which is taking us right to the precipice of, okay, what's now most important to talk about and discover and learn. And that's the unwritten half. So that totally checks. The most important half of this podcast is the silence that ensues.
The inflated ego nature should be brought up as well of some of these 20th century thinkers, all like Heidegger, Deleuze, Wittgenstein are the main culprits, but all of the ones that sit under their families, like seriously, like 1,000 plateaus, you can read it any which way. Each of them is a plateau. You can read it backwards and it syncs up with Dark Side of the Moon. Like there's a level of glazing within this family of erudites that really like has been taken up a notch as well. If we're trying to we want to be intoxicated, but through sobriety, we want to reach intoxication. And that can be difficult when you explore some of these thinkers. So I wanted to pay some credit to that as well.
Yeah. So to give a quick account of Wittgenstein, he was kind of a genius from a young age. I think he was born in a pretty wealthy family, I want to say. Yeah. And where was he from?
Austria.
He was Austrian. He actually served on the front lines. He was like a firearms mechanic or something of the sort, and was enrolled in the military at a certain stage. But essentially, just a genius and had big aspirations and lots of things he wanted to do. I guess didn't really need to put the time in to master something, but then also sort of learn that you almost get an arrogance that it's like, it's not worth my time to learn this thing and give it like proper treatment because I just know the answer. That happens like a couple of times at like major points in his life.
He also had some deserved and warranted approval from, we should bring up Bertrand Russell, right? Whose tutelage he was under. And it's almost like, well, Bertrand thinks I'm the real deal, so I must be onto something. And Bertrand wasn't sure himself.
Yeah. Yes. And Wittgenstein sort of got into this, like he enjoyed problem solving, ridiculous IQ. And he wrote to Frege, who was a philosopher kind of earlier than Russell, also like a logician and an analytical philosopher, part of the analytic tradition. And he was working on the problem of Frege, of trying to solve the logical inconsistency at the core of mathematics. I guess I couldn't tell you exactly what he was working on, but he was the foundations of mathematics, how we can deduce it and know it is real without having a referent to an external source. And Wittgenstein wrote to Frege with a solve for this problem, and he really believed that he had solved it. And he wrote to Frege and gave him his theorem and his proofs. Frege read it and thought, this guy's a genius, but he doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, you're wrong here, here, and here. Sends it back and then recommends Wittgenstein goes and studies at Cambridge or wherever. And that's when he goes and meets Russell, becomes a student, and Wittgenstein ends up having such a large influence on Bertrand Russell. And as you say, Russell saw a lot in Wittgenstein and taught him, and he was there for 5 or so years. And, Russell was the one to help get Wittgenstein up to that, up the ranks in academia, and did so quite effectively. Wittgenstein, when he's there and the war is breaking out at this time, the First World War, he's working on the Tractatus at this time. And even when he was in war, when he was in the trenches, he had a manuscript of the Tractatus in his backpack. He was working on it during that time. And when he comes back and finishes it, he kind of hands it in and says, look, according to this theory of meaning, philosophy is meaningless. Like, according to this set of facts and this picture theory, the words we're using must describe real things and objects in the world, and when we conflate them to talking about these abstract entities, we're not able to discernibly know that we're making real propositions. And so he says, philosophy is essentially done for. There's a method to resolve the philosophical disputes we're having, but that is just to show where the logical inconsistencies are, and it doesn't ground into a disclosure about reality. It just grounds into getting the facts straight about how we're using language, like in a logical.
Flesh this out, because this is like a really crux thing. He's not saying everything hitherto is nonsense, full stop. He's not saying being, substance, the study of these things are stupid. He's saying that when they don't map onto a possible state of affairs, they're stupid and meaningless. And for him, yes, a proposition is only a proposition if it maps a possible state of affairs. So it's very highly contingent what he's saying. It's not just everything is nonsense. Everything is nonsense within a certain paradigm. And most of the time we're engaged in that illusory paradigm is what he's saying.
Yeah, and so Wittgenstein sort of hands in this paper, gives it to Russell, and believes that he's essentially completed philosophy. Like, he's, again, in the same way that he tried to come to Frege and say, look, I've solved this mathematical problem, here are my proofs. He does the same thing to philosophy, and then like leaves academia. He goes off literally into the countryside and becomes a teacher. And then 6 years later, he actually gets stood down for like hitting a kid. But just that's how you were disciplining back in the day, right? You had canes and stuff. But yeah, he got kicked out, which is honestly, like, I'm not gonna say it, but it's more credit to him. But so he really leaves, and I mean, a lot of the philosophers at that time did leave academia because you had just had the First World War and you were devastated, and part of their response was to like teach and educate the next generation so that something like that would never happen again. But it also shows how, like, where his beliefs were and the stakes that he put on this. And yeah, to kind of wrap up the biography, he writes a later work called Philosophical Investigations, published after his death. And what we get there is a really different philosophy to his first one. So there's an earlier Wittgenstein and a later Wittgenstein that are often read as two, complementary but separate accounts. And interestingly, like, Wittgenstein would say that you should read them both together at the same time to get the full picture and the full movement between them. They are almost like antagonistic towards each other, but also complementary in that same fashion. So that's a bit of a picture of who he was. Are there any other flavors you'd like to add about him before we then get into like the crux of it?
I just want to clarify, he couldn't have literally said to read them in tandem, right? Because the second book was published posthumously. Do you mean like scholars of his have said that?
Yeah, I wonder if he alluded to something like that, but yeah, he didn't literally say, here are my books, read them together. But it was like these notes later on, and maybe, through his students and what they learned from him, like that kind of transmission was to say, okay, now we're supposed to read these together.
Cool. Now let's get into the crux of it then.